Hey guys, what's up? It's Stacking Chairs, the youth ministry podcast all about serving in youth ministry, whether it be youth group, youth camp, whatever God has you serving in, that's what we're talking about. I'm one of your hosts, Josh Paul Hamus. I'm joined by my fellow host and good friend,
Kyle Gray. Josh, what was that? You have a little mind?
I do the little pause so that way when the music hits,
oh wow,
it does the little
See
intro.
if you could time it all out.
Yeah.
It would be so fantastic. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, today we are joined by a good friend of mine that I have not seen face to face. I saw you on video, but I've not seen in over 20 years.
24.
Wow.
That's crazy. So this is my friend JC. JC Groves is a pastor down in, it's up in Tennessee. The other thing I noticed is this, little caveat. Have you noticed how all of us from Pennsylvania,
We say down.
We say
Everyone's
down. Everything's down.
Yeah, that's because we're usually at the top.
Yeah.
No, now we're not. Kyle and I are both from Pennsylvania. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's we got an aura about us.
Wow. But yeah, JC is a pastor from up in Tennessee. How long have you been pastoring at that church?
We started the church 21 months ago.
That's crazy.
October
Oh, wow, okay.
30th, 2022.
Now, how long have you been a pastor overall?
Yeah, I started in student ministry 21 years ago, full time,
awesome. That's
and have been doing it.
Wow.
And so JC was one of our speakers. We are in our last week, and so again, we are in camp. Not right now, not when you're listening to it, but
you'll
when
be
we're
listening to it this
recording it,
winter.
we are doing it in camp, and it's been awesome. Josh, I can't believe that this is the last week of summer camp for 2024.
Yeah, it went pretty quick.
It did.
It always feels faster
It
on
does.
the back end.
It normally does, but like even the beginning. But I can't tell if that's because I spoke for Rich. I did his week 4, and so that like got up to week 4, and it was like, and then after that, it just
You ended up speaking
twice.
Just twice. Okay.
Yeah, just twice.
For some reason in my head it was 3 times, but
no, just twice.
Yeah,
just twice.
not that important.
Yeah, and next year I'm on the schedule, kind of possibly not on the schedule. We can talk about that later. It doesn't matter. Hey, so today we're going to talk about a strange topic. I have no doubt that there were some of you that you saw the title and you were like, I'm tuning in for this. As well as there's some of you that are not listening because you saw the title and you're like, I'm not going to tune in for this. Here's the deal. I think that this is a problem, let me be very specific, can be a problem, not just with a whole church, but with us as individuals. That and let's be honest, it's a whole lot easier in our walk to be legalistic than for us to be more open and just allow God to. And I know you got the polar end of the swings. I know there's some of you right now that you just do whatever. No, that's not what we're advocating. But at the same time, the other end of that pendulum swing in legalism has hurt a lot of people for a long time.
Yeah.
And Josh, both of us have experienced some of those different things. But JC, that kind of is your story and kind of how you got started and then kind of even led towards the podcast that you run and do with those other 2 guys. Can talk to us. Tell us your story.
Yeah, so we all grew up. Hey, let me say it's awesome to be here. I'm
thanks.
excited. I'm a big fan of Stacking Chairs podcast. As a former student pastor, spot on, guys.
Yeah.
It's great. We grew up very legalistic in a culture that was very man-made ideology preached as Bible culture. Some crazy rules, Kyle. We used to have to swim in blue jeans because showing your leg was nakedness.
Wow.
It's not in the Bible, but somebody said, hey, this is a biblical standard, so that's what we did. Crazy. Some stuff that probably I could say on this podcast, you'd be like, there's no way that's true. And then some people listening will be like, oh, yeah, I did that, But it was legalism to the point of almost trying to make the Bible say things that it doesn't say. It's man-made ideology. So long story short, back in 98, my eyes started opening to this as a high schooler. Okay, there's a lot of things that are being preached that aren't in the Bible. As I started getting into the Word myself, learning and growing, realizing, hey, this isn't the Jesus way. This is something that's counterculture to that with what we've talked about this week, And 2000 ended up going to camp And God just really opened my eyes. It was the first time that I came to a Word of Life camp and really saw a whole different way of doing things. And almost like the scales started falling off my eyes, like Saul. And long story short, throughout the last 24 years, it's just been this growth of becoming more like Jesus. Well, 5 years ago, I'm driving to Texas. My wife's from Dallas, so we've got a 17-hour drive. And I'm listening to podcasts, and I'm trying to find a podcast that has anything to do with legalism, leaving fundamentalism, trying to get out of this culture. There's nothing, no podcast.
Yeah. I
picked up my phone, called my buddy Nathan Cravat, who's one of the co-hosts with us, 2:00 in the morning. He said, "What's up, Groves?" I said, "Hey, man, we got to do a podcast." He goes, "I'm in." I said, "Do you want to hear what it's about?" He's like, "I don't care. Let's do it." I said, "Dude, we need to do a podcast talking about recovering the fundamentals or going back to the basics." And he was like, "Oh, definitely in." We prayed about who our next host would be because we wanted to have three of us just to kind of bounce ideas off of. And God led us to a guy by the name of Brian, who all three of us pastored and grew up in this legalistic culture. And so we started the podcast 5 years ago and just said, we're going to share our story. And, it was a little weird because I had been out of that culture for over 20 years. And to go back into it, it was like stepping back into time and having to relive some of that PTSD in certain ways from certain things. And also it made me take a step back and look at why do I believe what I believe? Because what you just said, the pendulum swing is a real thing. People will leave legalism and then they go to the complete opposite end and you just see them completely away from God at all. And so we started this podcast and we didn't know what it was going to do, how it was going to take off. And a few episodes in, couple 100,000 downloads. We're like, oh, people are listening. Yeah. Okay, let's continue to talk. And we're 5 years in, 180 episodes, and the guest that we've had on, mind-blowing. Never thought we had talked to some of the folks that we have. The people that it's been able to help is where, our whole mission is we want to help and encourage people whose lives have been negatively affected by fundamentalist legalism in the church. But to also challenge those who promote tradition over Scripture, which is what happens a lot of times in those circles. And so that's what we've been doing for 180 episodes now.
Now let me put this out on the table, because a lot of times we talk about legalism, but I would say at this point it's kind of one of those church words that we either just label stuff with and we don't like, oh, well, that's legalistic.
Sure.
Yeah. When it might not be legalist. So let's put a definition on the table. When you talk about that, JC, where are you coming from and what are you speaking about?
When we speak of legalism, we're talking about anything that's a man-made ideology, that's something preferenced, preached as Bible. Something that is an opinion that you have, and then you make Scripture back it up, even though Scripture doesn't say anything about that. That would be what we're talking about.
I always had a guy challenge me that anything that you say, you have to do this to make you more like God, or if you don't do this, you won't be godly. And again, it was all this external stuff that I was doing as if, and I know that they would, I shouldn't say no. I don't believe most of the people that preach that way or talk that way would say Jesus wasn't enough, but in all actuality, that's a lot of times what we're saying.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, it goes completely opposite of Galatians, where Paul is saying, we're saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And all he's talking about is the church is trying to earn their salvation. They're trying to do a lot of legalistic things to earn God's favor. You said something the first night of camp that I think is very important, that's counter to legalism, is that on our best day, God doesn't love us anymore. On our worst day, he doesn't love us any less. Legalism says, I always have to do and do and do in order to earn God's favor. Look, I'm learning to live from acceptance, not for acceptance. And legalism holds you bound to trying to earn the Father's love. And it's like a treadmill. I hate treadmills. I mean, look at me. But, that's why I go to Planet Fitness, because you can have cupcakes on Tuesday and pizza on Thursday at Planet Fitness. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Sign up. It's free. I literally saw a lady eating a piece of pizza on a treadmill. My kind of gym. No judgment-free zone. But this religious, legalistic tendency is almost like a treadmill. You can only go for so long before you have to get off that treadmill. And legalism is like you're wearing out. You can't keep going. And it's just it makes you more frustrated. And honestly, that's why we've seen a lot of people just throw in the towel and quit because they're like, I can never please God enough.
Yeah.
That's not what it's about.
Yeah, Josh, that's what I was going to ask you. You've seen some people kind of give up and walk away from the church and experience that. And
yeah, well, that's actually one of my major questions I had is how do you balance that the deconstruction conversation has been massive over the past probably decade or so, especially since I was in high school, and that was a decade ago now. But the deconstruction conversation, I remember going to the Bible Institute with classmates who would come in. They had all of this information, all this knowledge, and then after the Bible Institute, I remember a guy would just sit there. He'd always have his Bibles ready to debate.
Yeah.
And then he called himself an apologist, and then he left Word of Life. 2 years later, non-binary, completely, rescinded all of his
pendulum swing.
Yeah, he went the exact opposite, and so, it's interesting to see. You see all of this, like, okay, rule following, knowledge, and it doesn't hold you to this place. So I guess the question for me is, how do you? I mean, it must be a massive responsibility. You have a big listening audience. We talked about this a little bit before. How do you guys cautiously introduce this idea of saved by grace alone through faith, while also not completely throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and making sure that we understand, hey, we do have works that we do operate off of as we're followers of Christ, but they don't save us. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, I would consider myself in a way a deconstructionist. Like, we're deconstructing from the ideology that is preached as Bible that's just not Bible. Yeah. And so what we're saying is we want you to I think that's great to deconstruct from that. Yeah. But you got to get into the Word, not just to find an argument, but you get into the Word to help you grow and become more in your faith, more like Jesus, you know, that sanctification process. Yeah. And so as we're walking through this, we're helping folks that have been stuck in this pleasing people culture, and when they're coming out of that, we're saying, but you can't just replace that with different legalism. Yeah. Because what happens is they'll leave one set of legalism, pendulum swing, they go to the other. Folks that are ready to debate, if you want to find something to debate, to be unhappy about, to be mad about, you can find that, So what we tell them is discipleship is where you have to end up. In the culture we grew up in, discipleship was a dirty word because you get saved, you get baptized, and then you're good to go. Yeah. There's no growth. The problem is what happens is you've got people who are following the way that are spiritual babies. Yeah. They're drinking milk. They're not able to eat meat, if you will. Yeah. And what we're saying is as you deconstruct from man-made ideology, you got to replace it with Jesus. You got to replace it with the gospel. Yeah. That is what we build our life on. Yeah. So it's this deconstruct in one way of a religious ideology to Jesus. Yeah.
And do you guys think it's weird, though, that most all the people that I've spoken to that deconstruct their faith do not consult the Bible at all?
Not at all.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. You have to start from Scripture.
Right.
That's the foundation. Yeah. The problem is they're just people that deconstruct. They're looking for something to not like about religion,
which typically goes back to those external,
that's it,
extras that we add in of, hey, I don't like the fact that you demand that well, here's the problem. There's something in Scripture where that came from, but we are so far off. Right. Yeah. And again, it just takes me back to those Pharisees where Jesus was like, okay, hold on, you mint or you tithe the mint and the dill and the different things, but you don't take care of your own family. You know?
Yeah, I mean, well, so as we talk about this, I think I've shared this story before. When I went through counseling, just going through panic attacks, and it's a whole long story. But as I was working through that, the guy I was counseling with, he just put me back to Ephesians, and he said, you need to renew your mind. And when you renew your mind, it's not putting new paint on the walls. Yeah. He goes, the foundation of your fear is a lack of trust of God. And that's not to say that,
sure,
we're not going to unpack all the way down of mental health, but he was right. Like, at the end of the day, I didn't trust God with the things I was fearing. I feared that if my wife went out to Target for the afternoon, she wasn't going to come back. She was going to, die in a car accident, or that, maybe she would leave me, or for whatever reason, because we got in an argument the day before, and there was these deep-seated fears based on past things that had happened and trauma. And he's like, you need to renew. And so you're not repainting the walls, you're tearing down the walls and you're rebuilding them on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And that is how I see this kind of conversation too. The fundamentalism and undoing the legalism is you're undoing the walls that you have of these legalistic facades, and instead you're building on the foundation of Jesus.
I think that's a great analogy. A lot of people in this culture don't have a foundation.
Yeah.
Their foundation is religious duty, just doing to please, just doing to make things work. Fear is a tool that is used to keep people in this legalistic mindset.
Yeah, right.
I mean, listen, bro, I used to fear the rapture. I mean,
Me
like
too.
it literally would captivate me. I was like, oh, it's going to happen. I'm not going to be ready. Am I saved?
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I lived in a day and age where this happened to me while I was on the island serving. We didn't have cell phones back then, but the boathouse had a payphone.
Yeah.
I would use 1-800-COLLECT.
Yep.
$800 worth of collect calls to my parents because I'm just so worried the rapture had happened. That whole summer I was there.
Dude.
Because I thought, I'm not living in this legalistic world. I'm hearing some crazy teachings, some music, some things. Am I okay?
Yeah.
Back in the day, if I couldn't get a hold of my parents, I'd end up calling the church just to hear Rhonda Thomas go, Rhonda Thomas, Temple Baptist. I was like, okay, the rapture didn't happen. I'm good to go.
Brother, like
We lived in fear. And
Yeah.
a lot of these guys that will lead this culture will hold you in fear because if you're fearful, you stay in line. Where freedom comes when you're finding that there is hope and life and joy and peace in Jesus beyond what I can do. He gives that freely, and that's...
Well, just the what you're talking about, the whole fear of the rapture thing, that was the foundation of the trauma that I had.
Yeah, same.
And that's why I was like, oh, my wife's gonna, like, it wasn't leave me. Basically, like, I'd never had somebody leave me. My parents never left me, but it was this fear of the rapture that I was, and by no fault, honestly, I wouldn't even fault my pastor or my parents at all. Like, it was the way it was presented, like, so was stuck in my head for some reason. And like I said, I want to be very careful that I'm not like saying my church was not this legalistic way. And I'm not saying that because Ryan, I'm not saying that because you're listening, our associate pastor at my home church. I'm not saying that.
Does he listen?
Yeah, he does. He actually just talked about our podcast in a sermon
Ryan.
the other day. Yeah, it's the associate pastor at my church and Pastor Jeff.
go.
They're awesome. And listen, I'm not faulting them at all.
Yeah.
It was individuals who would explain the rapture, trying to be helpful, but unintentionally gave me this fear that I lived with and caused panic attacks in adulthood.
Yeah.
And I could not overcome. And then it turned into, other things. But like, I was scared my family was going to leave me. And it was all based on that same thing you just said about.
Well, and to choose to try to love hopes all things, okay? To try to think about, like, I'm sure that none of these people at the heart of when they're trying to follow Jesus are saying, hey, I just want to control. I just want it this way. But let's be honest, it's a whole lot easier to control. Yeah. It's a whole lot easier to mandate. I know that it's easier, instead of saying, okay, let's talk about these things, just say no. Just say no to all of it. Yeah. And then it's like, well, once you start saying no, you now have to say no deeper and deeper and deeper, because you want to stay, I remember, you want to stay as far away from that line as possible. And obviously, again, I get that. But I think that we create these problems, we create these issues, and then when people get an ounce of freedom, like think about when you're an Amish person and you go on that the Rumspringa, and it's
I married an Amish girl, by the way.
Oh, really?
Did you really?
My wife was a Yoder from Pennsylvania.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
Wow.
Her family got excommunicated when she was like 8. And then they found Jesus, and
that's awesome.
I married her, baby.
My brother-in-law, similar. His grandparents, similar situation came out of. Yeah,
I saw an Amish guy one time.
I used to take pictures of him, and then I married one.
But those kids, they go on that Rumspringa and they get an ounce of freedom, and they go off the rails.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, we have to admit, we've done that with some of our Bible-believing
100%.
Christian young people, because we don't. And so then, but here's the problem. Then now the church has kind of backed up and said, well, now let's just not have any type of, and so that's why I think we've got some of these other Christian young people that's like, hey, you can live like the world, talk like the world, listen like the world, watch like the world, and it doesn't really matter. No, it does.
Yeah.
But the problem is, I think we got so afraid of saying no to anything that now we feel like we can't say no anywhere.
That is true.
Hey, Stacking Chairs audience. Ever catch yourself spending more time organizing your youth ministry than actually engaging with your students? You're knee-deep in lesson plans, small group questions, and parent emails. By the time you're done, you're too drained to connect meaningfully with the kids who need you most. It doesn't have to be that way. Word of Life Youth Ministries is here to help with a free youth group series that's designed to save you time so you can focus on building those vital relationships. Each lesson is loaded with detailed teaching notes, small group guides, and engaging discussion starters. Plus, their Parent Connect feature keeps parents in the loop effortlessly. Everything syncs up with the Multiply app, where you can track spiritual growth and reward your students' hard work. Imagine the freedom of walking into your youth meeting fully prepared with more energy to invest in your students' lives. Ready to make that a reality? Then visit the link in the show notes and download your free youth group series today. Let's get you back to what you love most about ministry. Yeah, there's danger there. That whole like movement of like you've heard the whole there's no hate like Christian love thing.
Yeah.
And that's funny because like I'll hear one person say, well, all you have to do is love, and that their life does not reflect Christ at all. Like they're living in a way that I would argue like, hey, you have nothing showing that you are a follower of Christ. And then you have on the opposite side where they say, no, like this is love, and they embody that whole mindset of there's no hate like Christian love. And it's so difficult to find that space in between where, okay, we're saved by grace through faith alone, right? But we're also living a life that exemplifies our love for each other. I mean, in John, we're called to love each other. That's how we're going to be known. Yeah. We're called to live a life that's honoring and glorifying to God. As someone who has a whole podcast built around recovering fundamentalism, how do you split that difference? Is it actually a split? And how do you communicate it?
Yeah, I think what we have to get them to the realization is that we are known by love. I mean, the world, because there's a breakdown of doing stuff to earn God's love and making, like, if you don't follow how I think you believe, then you're wrong, But the world will know you're my disciples if you love one another. And so we have to point them to the direction of being more like Jesus.
Yeah.
I think what happens with people that deconstruct, that go away from not holding anybody accountable, is they don't give them anything to look to build a foundation on. That's where discipleship has to come in. Community has to play a role. And so, people will say this about us, and they have, is y'all just don't like the fundamentalist churches. No, we do. We're trying to reform and bring back the fundamentalist church to the foundation of Jesus and his word and the gospel, not all this extracurricular stuff that we've made it about that really is just confusing people. And then what we see is you turn up the heat to make it do a lot of other stuff, and the pendulum is just bouncing back and forth because you have no clue who you are or what your identity really is.
You said reform it, and I thought of a little German monk in the 1500s who would have loved that mindset.
What was his
Martin
name?
Luther.
Oh, imagine that.
So how do you help people not just get angry?
Yeah.
Because let's be honest, when our belief system or our behavior is challenged, the natural thing is to get angry.
Time.
Yeah.
That's honestly, a lot of people listening that have listened to the podcast, we have 180 episodes, and you can see the growth in us. This podcast has been almost in a way a counsel session for us, because 180 episodes ago, 5 years ago, we went scorched earth. We were angry. We were frustrated. We're calling people out. I mean, it is wide open.
I've heard a couple of those ones.
It's wide open. We've had some folks on there that have called us out, and we went at them. Yeah. And now, five seasons in, our whole goal this season is discipleship. And you see this process of growth. And I believe, honestly, a lot of people that are leaving this culture, we've got a family group page. It's called the RFP Fam. There's a couple thousand on there. And I always tell people, don't judge somebody based on the chapter of their story you're walking into, because you may be on chapter 8 in your story, but they're on chapter 1, page 1. Yeah. And what tends to happen, we see this a lot, is people will go back and say, why aren't you where I'm at? Why aren't you healed yet? Why are you still worried about the rapture? So we have to, one, walk through it with delicacy to the point of like, hey, I understand where you're at. Continue to grow. Discipleship, getting into the word, reading the word for yourself without the lens of legalism, looking through the lens of Jesus speaking to you. And it's really just a time thing. We can't stay recovering forever. you have to recover at some point.
Yeah.
And so recovering fundamentalist is more along the lines, we want to recover the fundamentals, which are foundational to our growth in Jesus. And so there are a lot of angry people. I was angry for a long time. Yeah. Listen, 20 years out, we started doing this podcast, and it brought up all kinds of emotion in me. Yeah. And it took time to just get into the Word, to know that I've been saved, but I'm being saved. I'm becoming more like Jesus every day now. Yeah. I'm growing to become more like him. And as I'm growing, that anger is residing, that fear, that frustration. I'm becoming more like Jesus. And you just see the growth that happens. Yeah. So we want to help guide the ship of people that are listening to episode 1, when there's others that are on episode 180 and understand, okay, hey, we get your frustration. Yeah. Stick with it. You're going to be okay. You know.
Well, what advice do you have for those who are in the middle of art? So they're in a church, and that church is legalistic. You know, it's a bad place where they're at. They're not really considering the gospel in its entirety. They're at the very bottom. And do you recommend for a person, or they're in a ministry that they feel like, oh man, I'm really frustrated. I don't think they're understanding something. Do you recommend for a person to stay in that place and try and help with that growth, that sanctifying process of that church or that ministry? Or do you think it's better for a person to remove themselves from that situation entirely and then try and leave it? I mean,
this is one thing that we've come in contact with a lot in the last 5 years. Because listen, we've had a lot of people. We did not mean for it to happen that are saying, I'm no longer this, but I'm a recovering fundamentalist. That's my denomination. We're like, hold up, we didn't mean to create a denomination. Like there's the SBC, the IFB, and recovering fundamentalist.
Yeah, I'm of Paul, and I'm of
we're like we're not. I'm recovering fundamentalist from Pennsylvania. No, stop. Don't be that way. But what we tell people, and this is where the rub has been in a way, there's a lot of people that say, oh, well, you're just angry at the church. You're just hurt by the church. Yeah. You just want to deconstruct people away from Jesus. We have never said and never will say, leave your church. We have never said or will say, you should do it our way. Yeah. What we say is go to the Word. Get in the Bible. Number one thing that people that deconstruct from their faith that I see, they don't have a relationship with Jesus in the Word. Right. Yeah. They know the Bible, but they don't know the God of the Bible. Right. It reminds me of a guy when I was in Bible school. He was from Arkansas. His name was Brent Coffee, something coffee. And
he drank coffee.
He drank coffee. And he got up the very first day and he said, I want to read Psalms 23. And we all laughed. We're like, this dude doesn't even know how to say Psalms. He said Psalms. When he got done, it was evident that we knew the psalm, but he knew the shepherd. And what we want to get them to the place of knowing the shepherd, not just knowing the psalm. They can quote the Bible stories, the Bible verses. We want them to know Jesus of the Bible. When you get to that place, what you will start doing is your eyes will be open. Okay, this thing that they're teaching doesn't line up with Scripture. And the only way you can know that is by being in Scripture, by growing as a disciple of Jesus. And when you hold up the church, the ideologies, the things that maybe rub you wrong to Scripture, if it's counter to that, then you have to ask the question yourself, should I be here? Am I growing? Is what I'm learning helping me in my faith? We have people that are part of our RFP fam that have stayed in their local church and they are helping from within. They almost feel like a missionary in a way, helping people discover the Jesus of the Bible, not legalism. And then there's others that have had, I literally talked to a guy this morning as I was on my golf cart on the way to breakfast, and he said, hey man, my family and I, we've been in this church for 30 years. We've had multiple meetings with the pastor. There's questions that I'm just struggling with. There's a lot of man-made ideologies that's being preached, and we don't feel like this is where we're supposed to be anymore. We've been visiting this other church. The pastor, when he preaches, it's lining up with Scripture. How do we leave? And I'm like, you just be honest, be open. You don't have to go out with guns a-blazing and scorched earth. It doesn't have to be this big drawn-out thing. You've got to grow in your faith. You have to, and here's the word, own your faith. It can't be pastor's faith, youth pastor's faith, mom and dad's faith, grandma. You have to own your faith. And what happens so many times, youth pastors, you see this, camp directors, college pastors, you see students that graduate and they have a church faith, but they don't know who they are. That's where they end up going towards that deconstruction there. So we're just telling people, hey, own your faith. don't take what we even say as fact, because you're replacing legalism with something that's not, and we don't want to be that replacement theory in a way. Yeah. We want you to grow. We want you to get into the Word.
So it's natural for all of us to have preferences.
100%.
It's natural. I mean,
I have preferences.
Everybody does. And it's natural for every ministry and for every church and for every church leader. And I try to be real specific, at times. And I've had to lay aside my preferences. We've all had to lay aside our preferences.
Sure.
But let's talk about the biggest thing that all of us are dealing with: raising kids.
Oh, my goodness.
So how are you?
How old are your kids?
I don't know. I got 6 of them. Let's see. They are 15, 13, 12, 11, 9, 7.
Wow.
3 boys are the oldest, 3 girls are the youngest.
Wow.
So how are you raising them to love Jesus, understanding that you're having to give them a little bit of freedom and go, okay, here are the preferences of our household, which is perfectly fine, but following these are being obedient to your earthly father, and I'm so thankful for you. But now I'm trying to love you like my heavenly father, which is even when you disobey me, I still love you. And how are you helping your kids not to fall into, legalism on their own, or even legalism to follow you?
It's terrifying.
Yeah,
and it's difficult and
Okay,
hard.
next time.
This is where I tell my boys and my daughters is, one, we want them to know Jesus personally.
Yeah.
Don't just have a PK relationship with Jesus.
Yeah.
My boys are smart. My oldest is a genius. The second one thinks the toaster's haunted. So, we're a little worried about them. But teaching them, and this week has been really good for them. They're here with me at camp, and just helping them. I teach a lot, own your faith. Why do you believe that? And we have those honest conversations. Well, this is what you preach about. No. Why do you believe that? Yeah. And it's just open dialogue. And we have those open conversations. Kyle, raising kids, man, they send you home with them without a manual. And you're like, I got to keep this human alive.
Yeah.
And now that they're getting older and they start seeing dad preaching on Sundays, dad at home on Mondays, I want my life to reflect what I'm teaching. And that's why I said it this week, be the same publicly as you are personally. And you have to own your faith as well as a parent, because they see if you preach something and live something different, that's preaching louder than anything that you can sit down and tell them about. And it's, I hope we're doing okay at it, man. I'm still terrified. Every day I raise them, I'm like, God, just help them see you through me, because I know who I am.
Yeah.
And I've known some kids. I've known some ministry kids that seemed like they were always obedient, were always doing the right thing, and they were exalted on this pedestal of like, hey. And I remember talking to some of them years later, and they're like, I lived in such fear of ever messing up, because if I messed up, I was a standard. And I'm like, how horrible. Yeah. At the same time, you had other ministry kids that are like, okay, dude, I'm never going to be JC. I'm never going to be JC's kids. And so I'm going to run the opposite direction because I'm always a kid. And it's like, no, again, we don't want any of our kids or any of us to live in those pendulum swings. It's tough,
I told my boys even this week, I was like, just go be campers. You're not JC's kids. Just learn on your own. Grow. Ask questions. You're not going to embarrass me. I think being a PK, a lot of the times they're worried to ask the hard questions because you're supposed to be the preacher's kid. Right. You're supposed to know the stuff. Ask a question. Don't. And I told them this week on the way to Florida, don't worry if you come up with a question that you might think is something that a PK shouldn't ask. And okay, thanks, Dad. So give them that freedom.
We get in the car after every youth group, after every Sunday, and I try to ask my kids, all right, what'd you learn? And for a long time, one of my boys would go, I didn't learn anything. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I've already heard the story.
Yeah.
And I said, but what did you learn today? Well, nothing. In fact, I helped the teacher, and I'm like, oh, no. Oh, no. But how many times is that exactly us in the church where I sit there and I go, hey, I've already heard this message. I've heard some of the greatest preachers preach about that passage. So guess what? I never need to hear anybody else. And anybody who's not that great of a preacher can't teach me anything. No, absolutely not. I mean, I think that Psalms illustration is just so powerful of when I have a guy that gets up and opens a word or somebody that stands up and I go, I don't know if I jive with them. I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And I've even said to my counselors and my staff, hey guys, as of the end of week 1, you have now been in the Word more than any of these other kids. And probably even most of these leaders that show up.
Yep.
So if we are the ones that are in the Word the most, why are we not the ones that are changing the most? And how many times do we look to our kids and go, okay, did you hear that? Hey, did you? No. Did I hear that?
That's it.
Did I listen to
example.
that?
I do that exactly at church where I'm like, oh, my wife should have heard that one. And I'm like, no. And I catch myself and I'm like, okay, what do you need to do differently? When you're raising your kids in this situation, life.
Yeah.
The situation is
in
life.
the simulation called
in
life.
the simulation called life.
Truman Show.
Yeah. Oh my word, that'd
Come
be
on, let's be
terrifying.
honest.
Listen,
This big globe
I
here is
lived in
actually the
Salt Lake
sun.
City, Utah. That feels like the Truman Show in real life.
Really?
They know everything about you, bro.
Really?
That's terrifying.
That's a whole different episode.
Yeah. Well, so you're raising your kids, and we have youth leaders who listen, and parents and everybody else. They all have either kids in youth group, they have kids at their house. What are the tools you're giving your kids to overcome this? Are you are you sitting there giving them hermeneutical classes? Are you doing one-on-ones?
Yeah. So every morning we get up and it's like, all right, the homiletics, you're going to learn how to teach the Bible. Now the hermeneutics, here's the Greek word of the day.
Yeah.
We've actually been walking through, and I don't know if this is something y'all have, the New City Catechism. We've been walking through this, Tim Keller. And what it is a question and an answer. Catechismus is something the church has always done. It's for a question and an answer. So we've been walking through this at dinner, at night. We'll sit down, I'll ask a question, and then it gives an answer and explains it.
Yeah.
And it seems a little redundant in certain ways, but my boys and my daughters are picking up on this and they're running.
Yeah.
And I'm not having to sit here and preach a message at them, but I ask a question, we give an answer, and they remember it. I'm shocked. Cool. I mean, I'll go back through, so we're doing it with our church, and I'll be like, hey, what was question number 2? And I'll ask it. And my daughter, who is that tall, I don't know how old she is, I forgot, 11, she'll be like, that we are not our own, but we belong to Jesus both in life and death.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you got it, girl.
Yeah.
That is helping her get an ideology of who Jesus is and owning her faith.
Yeah.
I think the biggest thing is repetition. We're going to close out tonight. I'm looking at a verse where Peter is saying, hey, you're up to date on all this stuff. You're practicing it inside and out, but don't stop. Keep doing it. Keep pressing on. Yeah. Because repetition, practice makes what? Permanent and perfect. And it's one of those answers depending on who your dad was. You passed the test. Good job. But that's what the repetition is in the Word, is he says, it's not like I'm teaching you something new. Yeah. It is a dangerous place, like you just said. If you hear that sermon, I know that devotional, I got that. We always have to learn and be growing, because that is every day. My wife, former Amish lady, phenomenal cook. I mean, that girl, I'm a billboard for how good that homegirl can cook.
Dude, she's Pennsylvania Dutch, man. She's got to know how to
She
cook.
turns her own butter.
Let's go.
My goodness, this woman is awesome.
She make her own ice cream?
Oh, everything's scratched. I
love that so much.
The sourdough rolls,
kneading
bro, listen.
Do you start New Year's with like pork and everything, and do like the sauerkraut and everything?
She's awesome.
That's,
my wife.
that's
do you also take people to come and live at your house?
Yeah. Are you?
Come on, guys. What's one more? My wife makes us incredible meals. Yeah. She makes our kids breakfast, lunch. She makes a great dinner every night. I can think in the 17 years that we've been together, there are probably 8 or 9 meals that I remember that were phenomenal. Now, those 8 or 9 meals didn't get me to today sitting here talking to you on this microphone. It's all this food that has been prepared that might be forgotten, but I had to have it to sustain it, to press on. Yeah. There's going to be those mountaintop experiences in our kids' lives. I hope this week at camp for my boys is one of those mountaintop experiences. Yeah. But it's next week, on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, getting in the Word themselves, asking them a question, redundancy, living it out, that helps them grow to become more like Jesus. And so, we need all of that. And I think for the parent that's listening that have kids that are, the goal is for them to own their faith. Don't get frustrated when they're not, a biblical scholar by 9th grade. They're watching you. You own it. You can't feed what you're not eating. And the problem is, a lot of times what happens is we get stuck in this routine of not growing, and we hit burnout, and we start worrying, I'm just giving my kids a lot of stuff to do, but they're not growing, but we're burning out on our own. Hey, listen, when you hit burnout, you stop doing what's right, you start doing what's easy, and then things start crumbling. And our kids need us to be just as full to feed them them in biblical truth to where they're owning their faith. So I'm rambling now. But
you got me thinking. That's all.
No, absolutely. I mean, we're nearing the end of our time.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: as a pastor, who was once a youth pastor, who has worked through this, and obviously the one thing that I love about you, JC, is you're like, I have not arrived. I have not arrived. I'm continuing to grow and to develop. But if you could speak, I would say a lot of our listeners are youth pastors, youth workers. From a pastor's heart, what advice would you give to them? Because again, even with young people, it's a whole lot easier just to get legalistic. We talked a couple weeks ago to a guy, actually last week, to the guy that said when he did not do his quiet time, somebody wrote, they had a stamp, Satan won, at the top at the top of that book.
Throw that stamp away.
But again, it's easier just to look at a kid and say, all right, hey, let's do 7 days of quiet time. That kid worked up to that 7 days of quiet time. And then when they miss it, how would you, as the pastor, say, hey, here's how you love and challenge and encourage on? Because these youth workers right now, these youth pastors are reaching the next generation of youth pastors and youth workers, and they're going to continue to run in the direction that we're encouraging them to do when we do it right, or we see the mass exodus and they start running in a different direction.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would say the first thing is be real. Like, just be honest with those teenagers. Like, let them know where you struggle. I mean, that's something that we don't really think about a lot, but hey, I understand that maybe you had 4 days of incredible quiet time, and that fifth day you didn't, and you're beating yourself up over that. Hey, listen, I forgot mine yesterday, but here's what happens when I do miss it. I sense that lack of relationship. There's that lack of like growth in there, and I think that's the biggest thing. That if thinking back when I was a kid, if my youth leader would have just been real and not tried to paint this like godly picture of who they were, but were just honest, and it would have helped me more than the tools they were forcing down my throat, the things they were making me do, and that when I saw godly examples, that's the word, examples, they were leading by example. I want my kids to not hear the words that I preach on a stage, to see dad preparing sermons. I want them to see me live it out. I want the kids in our student ministry, in our kids ministry, to see dad, husband, father, pastor, leader living it out in a way that, there are practical tools that we can give them that will help them, but there's also real life, one-on-one, open honesty that I feel personally just goes a long way. And, there's always tricks of the trade, and it's kind of like a muscle, you have to continue to work on it to help it grow. I think our walk and giving them tools, ultimately the goal is owning their faith. Yeah. And each kid is different. Yep. You're going to have that one kid that is, you could sit down, read a Bible verse to and say, this is what I see in you. You have that I see in you conversation. They're going to get it. They're going to run with it. Yeah. Then you got the other one, like my Butters, that thinks the toaster's haunted, that you got to say the same thing over and over and over again and just pray for the day that it snaps. They get it. But, to the youth pastor that's watching and the parent that's watching, don't give up. That's the biggest thing. We tend to give up at times when we feel like they just don't understand. They just don't get it. Student ministry, like I always said, I did 17 years in student ministry. I love it. It's not always about right now. It's the blessing of 20 years, 30 years down the road when you see them and they remember it and they got it. And who knows what it will be that they'll grab onto and run with. Lead by example. You've got to be growing on your own before you can allow anybody else the tools.
Well, and it's so scary, man, because our kids mess up, they make a bad choice, and it's like, okay, how do I not react?
Oh, yeah.
Because I go, well, if I react, then you'll go, you don't ever want to do that again. No, they'll just learn not to ever tell me about it.
It's true. That's really true.
Man, JC, I appreciate it. Josh, I don't know about you, but man, just a solid conversation, just an encouraging one.
I also appreciated it, Kyle. Jeez.
Josh, I think I don't know about you.
You don't know if I would have... No, I'm just kidding. I'm messing with you.
I love this. Let's go.
Yeah, listen, when it's just Kyle on here.
Hey, Josh, can you tell me the most legalistic thing you've ever...
And now for small group. What's the most
the
legalistic thing you've
grievances.
done? I got a lot of problems with you people.
I just want you to know, I close my eyes every time I pray, even if I'm driving. I just figured Jesus is going to.
I pray without ceasing. I'm just sleeping all the time.
Take the wheel.
Oh, man.
No,
I love it.
JC, thank you so much, man.
Yeah, I'd love for y'all to check out the podcast.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. Give it a
RecoveringFundamentalist.org. You can go check it out. We're on every streaming platform.
Yeah.
Amazon Prime, Apple Music, Spotify, all that. We've had Kyle on before.
Yeah, they have. It was pretty fun. It was
a
we
great
actually got to do a
episode.
2 episode.
Yeah.
It got to be
Forgot
so
about that. We talked so much.
we got so much
Wow.
that
How long was it?
it was probably
Ended up being about 2.5 hours.
Yeah.
Both
Wow.
episodes.
You
Yeah.
guys have long episodes then. They're about an hour and...
We're only doing right now. The season that we're in, we're
Yeah.
doing one episode. We're doing 12 and 24 because we're all traveling and church planning.
Yeah,
So we're
okay.
doing one episode a month, and then
Yeah.
25 we'll go back to every week.
Well,
So-
that happened with us. My wife and I had another kid, and then we had like a 6-month hiatus.
you
and-
would.
I know.
Yeah, I know. I
How
wondered
dare
where
we?
y'all went.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, where's...
Oh, you actually do listen
I
then?
listen to every episode.
Listen, man. Listen,
Wow.
This guy
Okay.
has actually learned how to stack chairs.
That's pretty cool.
Just from
I got an award stacking chairs in... No, that's...
yeah, but
Top
they
contributor.
have merch. We gotta follow them. They've got some sweet
gotta get
merch.
some
and stuff.
merch?
Yeah, we gotta
Oh,
get
man.
some stuff.
I'll send you some
RFP.
hats.
Oh,
Do y'all not have merch?
We don't.
You should just make gold necklaces with the stack
Little-
of chairs.
with a
It's
little
like
chair.
a medallion that everybody can wear.
This is my
do have
favorite
little
thing
chairs.
that
That's it.
Josh
Make that
had.
into a necklace.
We could, we'll just sell little chairs.
Have y'all seen the videos of the meme of the guy that's like stacking chairs, maybe
That's right.
find a girl
That's
later?
right,
That's
yeah,
what I
yeah.
think of every time.
Yeah.
The Christian girl that sees the guy carrying 3 chairs at a time.
Yeah. No, we're relaunching our social media with a producer now who's handling all that stuff, and that's going to be his number one job is just to go and find reels of stacking chairs.
Okay,
that's so
because I'm
great.
not fearing legalism, I'm not going to offend anybody. That what if we start getting like kids in youth group instead of wearing their cross, they wear a chair around there.
That's what I'm talking about. That's it.
It's like an I vote sticker too. It says I stacked.
That's right.
I stacked. I love
Oh
it.
man! All right.
Fantastic.
All right. Well, it's lunchtime, so probably should get going here.
Probably should.
Favorite part of the day.
Yeah, mine too, man. All right, guys, this has been Stacking Chairs. Thank you so much for listening. Check us out on Stacking Chairs Pod everywhere. You can email us at stackingchairspod@wol.org. Like, subscribe. Kyle, any final thoughts? Before
Listen,
we get
guys,
going?
we would love to continue to hear from you. Share with us your thoughts. Share with us your passion. Share with us how we can be praying for you and for your ministry.
Amen.
We love connecting with that community.
Yeah,
and it's just
absolutely.
been an awesome thing to do.
JC, thanks again for joining us. It was so much fun, guys. Check out the
RecoveringFundamentalist.org.
It's not Recovering Fundamentals. It's the Recovering Fundamentals.
I don't know what it is.
All right, take it. Fair enough. Well, as long as you don't forget to
Stack your chairs!
There you go. That's how we end it. I don't know if you
love
knew
it.
that.
I
Yeah.
didn't. That was awesome.
Surprise.